Listen, the problem is if you just put on a shtreim on a bekshi, you look like a Muncie guy then.
Hence, no issue.
Okay, Ketvach, we're learning as it's chus for Shlema Filan Chaya Basarach. We're on Daf Chavvav Amid Aleph. We're a blot behind the Daf, but we're going to catch up soon. Still going to be in just a few more blot. It's lightening up a lot now, soon. And soon we're going to be up to the Stam. In two more blot, three more blot, we'll be up to Stam. But it's a little lighter. So four lines at the top. Nitmu Shireh, Nisrafu Shireh, Avdu Shireh. A mincha is made up of flour with other components, and you take a kaimitz from it, and the rest, whatever's left over, the silas that's left over, is eaten by, in the case of a regular mincha, it's eaten by the kaihanim. So if something happened to those shirah, that they got tamei, or they became burnt, or they got lost, kamidas Rebbe Eliezer kshera, according to Rebbe Eliezer, if this happened before you had already separated the kaimitz, but you hadn't yet been makter it, you didn't burn the kaimitz on the mizbeach, the carbon as a whole is a kosher carbon, you could still be makter the kaimitz. Kamidas Rabbi Yeshua psul. According to Rabbi Yeshua, it's puzzle. He says that you cannot have a kmitza, you cannot have a haktaras kmitza without the shirayim. Which the Gemara is going to say is kasava. Whether the question is, do you say shiura milsehi? Do we say when the Torah says that it says basar and it says dam? So when it says basar and dam, according to the man Amru says it's kosher. It just means you have to have basar and dam. According to Yeshua, it means you have to have basar and you have to have dam, each one separately. But then afterwards it says dam as long. So we learn out that because this is a analog to the same discussion that happens legabi a carbon a zevach. We have the same discussion about a mincha and a zevach. It's basar and dam. So there we say one mandama says you have to have both the basar and dam in order for the dam to be oila on the mizbeach. And similarly over here, you can only be makter the kaimitz when you have the silas, the shirem, which is similar to the basar. Zok the Gemara, Amra, v'husha nitmu kol shira. This is that which Rabbi Yeshua had said that it's possible. If you no longer have the shirayim, that's only if the entire shirayim is gone, that it's tamei. Al mixer shira loy. But if part of it became tamei, then it's going to be then it's still going to be good. Because what's the nafkamina? Kasaka daitach nitmein avad v'sarf loy. The Gemara at first says we thought to say that this emendation of Rav, this qualification of Rav in Rabbi Yeshua, that Rabbi Yeshua says it's possible if you don't have the shirayim is only if the whole thing is missing, but if some of it is retained, it's still good. That's only relevant to Tameh. But if it got lost or got burnt, then that wouldn't help. So Zakdamara, what would be the reason for distinguishing? My kasavar. Ikasavar shiureha milsehi. If you feel that if there's something left over, that allows you to continue afilu avivasarf nami. Even when it's lost and burnt, you should also be mutter. Should also be kosher. Ikasavar shiureha milsehi. V'nitma my time at Duratza. V'nitma my time at Duratza tzitz. My time at Duratza tzitz. What's the reason why nitma is going to be kosher if there's something left? Is because the tzitz is meratza. Yachi kosher anami. If the tzitz is being meratza, why does it only help if you have part of the shirayim left over? It should help even if there's nothing left over from the shirayim, because the tzitz is meratza, and it helps when it helps to save the shirayim even they became tamei. Right? Because this is not clear. We know that tzitz is meratza, but the question is that tzitz meratza on shirayim. Shirayim are not the actual carbon. This is what you're going to eat later. So the question is that tzitz meratza on that. Second la'olam kasava shira milsi. Really, Rav is saying that Rabbi Yeshua holds that what's left over is enough to justify, having something left over is enough to justify. V'nitma v'hu adin la'avid v'sarf. But that which he said nitma was not bedafka. He meant also that if it got lost or if it got burnt, he just picked the first one of the cases in the Mishnah, but he didn't mean to exclude the other reasons why the Shirayim are gone. Kedetani Rabbi Yeshua, Aimer kol azvachim shebetayrish shnayim mehem kazayis basar or kazayis chaylev, any carbon have left over kazayis of the basar or kazayis chaylev. And this is now we're talking about the Zevach analog, like the animal carbons analog. Over here we're talking about a mincha, but this is the same achloikas back in Zvachim. Zarek Adam, you zarek the dam, as long as there's a kazayis left. Kechatzi zayis basar, kechatzi zayis chaylev, but if you have a chatzi zayis of the basar and a chatzi zayis of the chaylev, so the basar is eaten by the bailam or the kehanim, and the chaylev is burnt on the mizbeach, so there's two there, they have two different lanes. Ein zarek Adam. That you can't be zarek adam. You have to have at least a kazayis. It's not enough to have a kazayis. But by an oila, if you look chatzi zayis basar, chatzi zayis chaylev zarek adam neshakula kol. By oila, we don't have that distinction because the basar is also not eaten by the bailam or by kehanim. It's burnt on the mizbeach together with the chaylev. So if you have a total of one kazayis that's being burnt on the mizbeach, that's enough. Left of the shirayim that you left that you can still do the zrikas adam. Or by mincha. Afilu kula kayemes lo yizrak. By a mincha, even if the whole thing is left over, you can't be zarik the dam. Now, I don't know if you remember this. We had this. The Gemara quoted this before, and the Gemara asked about this. Mincha maya vidite. What are you talking about a mincha? Mincha, there's no zrikas dam. What are you saying? And why should a mincha, even if it's kula kayemes, then you can't be zarik? What are we talking about? Amra papa minchas nesachim. We're talking about the mincha that goes along with the carbon. Sagadayta chayul bahadi zevach kaashe. I might think, since you bring the mincha together with the zevach, so if the whole mincha is left, that's as if you have the whole, it's like having a kazayis left. Kamashmalan. That's he's coming to tell you that no, the mincha is a separate thing. It doesn't save it, that you don't have to have shirayim, you don't have to have the chaylev or the bas. Minani mili, Zak the Gemara. Where do we know in the course of this? Rashi explains Minani mili. Where do we see that there's such a thing that just having the chaylev is enough to Zak Rashi Minani mili right across from here? Just saying the Rashi because there's no evidence in the Gemara. That's what it's talking about. It says, where do we know that chaylev, just having left over the fats which are burnt on the mizbeach, that's enough to justify being zarik the dam? On Rabbi Yechanim, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, Umatuba Mishum Yeshua ben Chananya, Amar Kra, v'hikter achelev l'reich nichayich l'Hashem. The Torah says you'll burn the chaylev as a reich nichayach, as a good fragrance to Hashem. Chaylev afav pi she'ein basa. Tells you that chaylev, even though there's no basa, that's enough to do the haktara. Ba'ashkan chaylev, that tells you the chaylev. There are two parts of the emurim. There are two parts of what's burnt on the mizbeach on a carbon that's not an oila. There's the chaylev, which is the fats, as well as the certain parts of certain organs, which is the yeseres ushtei klayos. The yeseres ala akaved, which is the parts that's near the liver, which is often translated as the diaphragm, ushtei klayos, and the two kidneys. So we know that the chaylev is left over. If you have a kazayis of that, you're zarik the dam. How do you know these yeseres and shtei klayos also that are also burnt on the mizbech? How do you know that they will allow you to be zarik the dam? The tani of mincha afilu kula kayemes la yizrak, because we said in the Mishnah that the mincha, even if the entire mincha, the nesachim is left, you can't be zarik the dam. Mincha hu de la yizrak, only something that's a totally separate, not part of the animal. That will a kazayis of that will not allow you to be zarik dam. Hayeser shtei klayos yizrak. Minalan. So where does this come from? The Torah says l'reach nichayach. That tells you anything that's burnt on the mizbeach and makes a pleasing aroma, which includes not just the chaylev and not just the basar of the oila, but also the yeseres shtei klayos. Even though the Torah said specifically chaylev. You have to say both of them. First of all, because of chaylev having a chaylev in yeseres shtei klayos like, If it just said chaylev, I wouldn't know this Yisrael Shtei Kleis, like we just said. That's why it has to say Kazav Rachmana Reich Nichayach. Kazav Rachmana L'Reich Nichayach Havamina Afilu Mincha. I would have thought that the Minchas Nesachim would also be enough to allow the Zrikas Dam Kazav Rachmana Chaylev. That's why the Torah writes also Chaylev. Zak the Mishnah. This is this is going to Bez Hashem be the last little hard shtickle, and then we're going to be easy going. Zak the Mishnah. Shaloi b'klisharis puzzle. So there's when you bring a mincha, you must be mekadesh the silas, the mincha in a klisharis at the beginning. You have to take the silas. It's normally an isarin of silas. You put it into klisharis and you say, I want this to be my mincha. Then you give it to the kohen. That everyone agrees on. And then the kohen must be kaimitz from that klisharis. And that's where our Mishnah starts. That's where things get sticky. What do you need after that point? So the Mishnah says, Shaloi b'klisharis pasul. The Tanakama says, if you don't then take the kaimitz, and because we've been talking about the kaimitz until now, so if you don't take the kaimitz and place it in the klisharis, the carbon is going to be pasul. You're not going to have a kosher mincha. Zak the Mishnah. Rav Shimon machshir. Rav Shimon says it's kosher even if you don't place it in the klisharis. We'll see exactly what that means. There'll be different versions of that. Hikter comes, or if the further avoid is not in the klisharis. Hikter kaimtza pamayim kshera. If you divided the kaimitz into two parts and you did the kmitza separate and you were makta them separately, it's kosher. It's so totally separate thing. This is our first version of what Rav Shimon said. Rav Shimon says it's kosher when you don't have a klisharis after the kmitza. Amri the Breder of Chia, my timer, Rav Shimon amakra kodesh kadashim ikachatas ukashim. We compare the mincha to chatas and asham. Bala oiv de biyad, oiv de biyamin kachatas. If the kohen has a choice of how he wants to do the avodah, he can do it with his right hand. If he wants to do it with his hand, he has to do it with his right hand, like a chatas. The kli of the b'smail kosher, but if he does it in a kli, if he takes it and he wants to do the avodah in a kli, then he does it in his left hand. He has the option to do it in his left hand, like an asham. For Rav Yanai disagrees, and this is really a machlokes. There's a separate machlokes between Yehuda Rav Chia and Rav Yanai. That's going to be the first two shitas are going to be opposed to one another. Rav Yanai Aimer kivesh akamsu mikli sharas maleh maktira afilu behemnayu. He says once you already took the kaimitz from the original klisharis, he doesn't have to do the avodah from that point on with the klisharis. He could even do it. It doesn't have to be with his right hand. He could even do it with his belt. Afilu mikila shel charis. He could even do it with a piece of cheres, a piece of earthenware. There's no requirement of a klisharis to do the avodah in a klisharis, nor is there even a requirement to do it with the right hand, like Rabbi Yehuda bar Chia said. Nachem by Yisakam, the third shita, and that opposes the first two shitas. Hakol moedim bekaimitz sheton kiddush. Nachman says that everyone agrees that the kaimitz needs kiddush. The Gemara is going to explain later on that after you take out the kaimitz, it must go into klisharis, but he's saying that afterwards you don't have to. There's no requirement. You don't have. Once you are makadosh klisharis, you can take it out of the klisharis and bring it to haktara, whichever way you want. Which is not like the first two mandarim said it didn't have to go into klisharis at all. They said you have an option. You can put it in the klisharis, so you can do it by hand. But then there's a machlokes. If you do it by hand, you have to do it in your right hand or left. Meisvei. So first we ask Akasha on Rabbi Yehuda Rav Chia, the first sheet that we had said. It has to be done with the right hand. Hakter chalavim ve'ivarim ve'etzim. The burning of the chalev, the different chalavim, different fats, and the ivarim, the different limbs that get burnt on the mizbeach, let's say by an oila, ve'etzim, and the wood gets burnt on the mizbeach, shehelim bein biyad, bein b'kli, bein biyamin, bein b'sma. Whether you take it by hand or in a kli, whether in the right hand or the left hand, ksherin, it's all kosher. hakaimitz v'haktoiris v'halavayna. The same thing with the kaimitz and the ktoiris and the lavayna. Shehelim bein biyad, bein b'kli, bein biyamin, bein b'smal ksherin. He says you could bring one of the things we mentioned is the kaimitz. We also say the ktoiris and the lavayna. It could be whether in biyad or b'kli. So the chayra is not. It's bein biyamin, bein b'smal. Even if you do it biyad, you can do it b'smal. Tiyufta the Rehuda B'Chia said you have to do it with your right hand if you do it by hand. Let's start in Ketani. He says no. What it meant to say biyad biyamin b'kli bein biyamin bein b'smal. It doesn't say you can do either hand or in a kli and then either with the right hand or left hand. What it means to say is if you do it biyad, then it has to be in the right hand. If you do it with the kli, then you can do whichever hand you do. Tashma. Kamtzei shalom klisharis, v'kitshu shalom klisharis. I want to bring a raya again, and now I think this is a kasha. So yeah, this is again I think another kasha. Tashma kamtzei shalom klisharis, v'kitshu shalom klisharis, v'helaviktir shalom klisharis. Possible. If one were to, if a kayin did the kmitza without, not from a klisharis, or he was mekadosh it, the kmitza. They took the kaimitz. He wasn't mekadosh in a klisharis, and he brought it on the mizbeach, not in a klisharis. Possible. Well, that's a tanakama. That's a tanakama of our Mishnah that disagreed with Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon machshirin b'matan kli. Rav and Rav Shimon say it's mutter to do it even not in a klisharis. So l'chayre it's shver. He's saying machshirin b'matan kli. So that's not like the last what Rav Nachman by Yitzchak had said. There's a case of Rav Nachman by Yitzchak who had said that you have to first be machsher in a kli, and then you can do whatever you want. Over here was saying even without a matan kli. What it means to say is after you put it in a kli sharis, then from that point on you can do it into with a kli or without a kli, however you want. So that's how Rav Nachman by Yitzchak would answer. All the following questions are all going to be on Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Shita that you don't have to first do an asina b'kli sharis after the kmitza. Tashma chaimitz ta'an kli sharis. The Chamim say a kaimitz needs a kli sharis. Ketzad kaimitz b'kli sharis. He does the kmitza from a kli sharis, and mekacha b'kli sharis, and he puts it into kli sharis. Or maleo maktir b'kli sharis, and then he brings it onto the mizbeach and the klisha. So that again is the Tanakh of our Mishnah who disagreed with Rav Shimon. Our whole Gemara, the three of machlokes in the Gemara is about Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon Aimer kimin shekamsum leklisharis maleo maktira shaloi beklisharis. Since he took it from a klisharis, he could be maktir it without a klisharis v'dayik. So l'chayra again, it's Shver Nachman Yitzchak who said you do have to put it into klisharis after the kmitza. So the Gemara Aimer kimin shekamsum v'kitchu beklisharis maleo maktira v'dayik. What it means to say is if you first will mark the shit in the klisharis after the kmitza, then you could do it without a klisharis the rest of the avodah. Tashma, another question on Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Kametz biyaminoi, he did the kmitza with his right hand, v'nosam b'smail, and he put it into his left. And yachzil laminoi, he has to return it to his right hand to continue with the avodah. B'smailoi, he put it if it was in his left hand. While it was in his left hand, he had a machshava bein chutz l'mkoyme bein chutz l'zmane. So a left hand is not the appropriate way to do a mincha, to do a kmitza, to do the avodah of a kmitza. So we're saying if he has a machshava, whether it's a machshava is chutz l'mkoyme or chutz l'zmane, it's going to be possible bein by karis. Since it was b'smailai, that's not considered to be a valid avodah, so it can't have as we know, when you do pigel, it has to be done in the appropriate way, other than the fact that it's pigel, that he has a machshavas chutz l'zmane, in order for pigel to apply mechayev kares. So if it was in his left hand, it's not being done in a valid way, so therefore the machshavas pigel will not be mechayev kares. So then you have to, the Shita Megabetzis adds in the words biyaminoi, right? Because we said before b'smailai, now we're going to say biyaminoi. Biyaminoi chishav aleh chutz l'mkoyme pasol ve'en bekaris chutz l'zmane pigel v'chayv l'v karis. If it is the right hand, then it's machshavas chutz l'mkoyme is pasels, which is always the rule that chutzim kami only makes it pasel, there's no kares. If he has chutzim zmani, then it's pigel and it's chayv no kares. Divrei Elazar of Shimon. That's what Elazar of Shimon. Chayv kivish naslu ismail pasaltei matnasei. The Chachamim say once you put it into his left hand, the Chachamim say it has to be in a klisharis, then it's going to pasel the whole matana, the whole mincha is going to be pasel. My timer, what is the reason that the Chachamim say this last thing before we get to the issue of Rav Nachman? But my timer the Rabbanim mishum de boy kedusha bekli v'kivish nasul ismel nasa kedam shenifach mitzava behema. Since according to the Chachamim, the left hand is an invalid way of doing the avodah. So it's as if we know by a carbon, by a animal, when you do the shechita, if the blood goes straight onto the floor, once it goes to a invalid place, that Kabbalah has been ruined, that dam has been ruined, and you can no longer save it by putting it into a klisharis. It's like dam shenishbach, dam that got poured out from the tzavar of the hema onto the floor, that v'asfu shepasul. That the Gemara says that if you gather it up, it's going to be pasul. So similarly over here, according to the Chachamim, if it went to the left hand, that's the same thing as blood that went onto the floor, and it can't be saved. So but we see from this, since the Chachamim say once it goes onto into the left hand, it becomes dam shenishbach. Rabbi Elazar of Shimon say it's still good, even if it went to the left hand. So Vaistais, they don't need it to go into a kli, because if they need it to go straight from the kmitza into a klisharis, like Rav Nachman Yitzchak said, it should also be nishbach according to them if it went to the left hand. Tiyufta de Rav Nachman, tiyufta. That's a good kasha on Rav Nachman. Zek the Gemara. So really, this kasha was direct to Rav Nachman Yitzchak. But Rav Yehuda Bar Chia is also collateral damage, right? Rav Yehuda Bar Chia had said there's no nafkamini between the left hand. He had said that you have to do bedafka in the right hand. Zak the Gemara. Rav Yehuda Bar Chia Misayaya. Rav Yanai, according to Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chia, it's very good why it has to be bedafka the right hand. Rav Yanai leimet havitiyafta, but it shouldn't be shver on Rav Yanai. Rav Yanai says we're not machalik between the right hand and the left hand. Rav Yanai, another army katana the hektiv alav tzadam katani. He says einachanami, this brisa is not like me. But before we had asked that kasha on Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chia, and he had reinterpreted the brisa and say l'tzadam katani. Rav Yanai would say that brisa I don't agree to do l'tzadam katani, to do violence to the pashta pshat in the Mishnah, in the brisa, and therefore that brisa is going to be saying like me. Okay. Zok the Gemara. Hikter kumsa pamayim kash ksheira. The Mishnah had said if he divided the kaimitz into two separate parts in order to burn on the mizbech, it's still kosher even though it's in two parts. Amar Yeshua ben Levi. Pa'amayim v'loy pa'mei pamayim. You could divide it into two parts, but not into more than that, to 3 or 4 parts. V'yoichan amar pamayim v'afilu pa'mei pamayim. Yochanan disagrees. He said even 3 or 4 parts, it's still a kosher haktara. My benayu. What's the difference between them? They disagree on 2 points, which are really connected. That first of all, whether a kaimitz can be, when a person takes a kaimitz, it means the kain takes a handful of the silas. Can that be less than 2 zaysim? And in a connected question, can a haktara, when you burn, can it be less than a kazais? Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who said that you can only do 2 times. Savar ain't kaimitz pachas mishnei zaysim. A kazais is always 2 times. So we said you could do a 2 times. That was bedafka, because you can have 1 kazais in each half of the kaimitz. The ein aktar pchusa mikazais, and you can't have aktar less than a kazais. So therefore, he says it means only 2. You could have a kmitza less than shnei zaysim. When we say pamayim, it's already going to be less than a kazayis in each one. You could have aktar less than a kazayis, so it doesn't make a difference. Once anyway we say pamayim, it might as well be 3 or 4, because anyway you're not going to have a kazayis in each one. Itmar from what point does a kaimitz? Kaimitz means you take the kaimitz and you throw it on the mizbeach to be burned. At what point are you allowed to start eating the shirayim after you put the kaimitz on the fire? Chanina Amma Mishem Mashla Bayar. Chanina says as soon as the fire catches on the kaimitz, it's already on the mizbeach, and now the shirayim are mutabachila. Yechon Amma Mishetatis Bayar Asar Berubai. When the fire is lit on most of the kaimitz. Only Behudel Rabbi Bar Yitzchak. I'll explain to you the reason of Rabbi Yochanan that says that it has to be the roiv. Amar Krav, Hine Allah Kitar Aretz Kitar Kivshin. The Torah pasuk says Lagabi Sadaim that it caught fire, and it says the fire went up like a kitar, which is the lashon of haktara, which we use for on the mizbeach. Kikitar Kivshin, like the fire of a furnace, and a furnace only starts putting up smoke when it's a roiv, when it's caught on roiv of it. And kivshem malakita achatasa arberuboy, and we know that only happens when it's in the roiv. So that's how we know that the ketairis, the haktara of the kaimitz has to be where it's most of it is caught on fire. Only Rav and Barav Ada Rava Armi Talmidcha. Your Talmud told me Amar Rav Amram b'Shem Rav Amram Tanya Any Eladvam Shadarkan Likar Belayla. We had said that there's a rule that you can be makriv, certain things can be brought in the Beis HaMikdash to be burnt on the Mizbeach at night. Kagoin Evarim, Upedarim, like the Evarim, and the Vedarim is the Chelev, Shemal Maktirim, Evaya Shemesh, that they're brought after nightfall. A carbon is normally brought during the day, and the Emurim are brought at night. And they're burnt, they stay on the fire a whole night to burn. Dvarim, Shadakan Likar B'yoim, but those things that are brought to be burnt by day, like the kaimitz, v'halavina, and the levina that goes along with the in the mincha, v'haktairis, the separate haktairis that's brought twice a day, or minchas kaihanim, the mincha of a kayin that's kulei kalal, that there's no kmitza that you burn the whole thing, or minchas kayin mashuach, the minchas chavitim that the kayin brings twice a day, or minchas mesachim, the minchas that come along with the carbon, shemal maktir mevay hashemesh, that you bring Mivaya Shemesh. In fact, the Gemara, before we even continue with the Brisa, the Gemara interjects. For Amid Dark only Karbayim. Why are you saying Mivaya Shemesh, which means after nightfall? You just said these are things that are brought by day. Ella in Bahar Shemesh. It's not Mivaya Shemesh, but it means, at least at this point, the Gemara says it means as it's becoming night, right before it becomes night, that you bring them. Shemesh Achav V'Holchin Kol Alayla. Minayin. How do we know that they are able to be brought at night, near by the end of the day and then burn the whole night? Tamalayma, Zeis Tyrus Ayla Riba. Tyrus says Zeis Tyrus Ayla, it's Marba, to include even those things that are supposed to be started by day. If they start by day, they can continue at night. It's the fact the Gemara, now we're finally getting back to our question, right? We had said that you have to have that roiv of the kaimitz is on fire in order for it to be valid, for it to be haktara. If he's saying that he does it, puts it on immediately before nightfall, it takes a couple of minutes for the fire to catch on the whole thing. And we're allowing you to do it right up to nightfall. So there's not enough time for the fire to catch on the whole thing. So Chayrit Shver on the Manda Amr, who said it has to go in, I think it was Rabbi Yochanan, that it has to go on the entire kaimitz, or the rive of the kaimitz. They're like kasha, kan likloit, kan lahater. No, we're talking about different consequences. Legabe, that it should be considered it's already on the mizbech, that you could keep it on for the night. It just has to be for a second. But legabe the din to be mata the shirayim enechanami, it has to be beruba. Rebbe Elazar rejects the emendation of the brisa that we changed when it says mevaya shemes to imba shemes. He says no, it means after nightfall. We had said it's talking about something that's supposed to be brought at day. How could you say it's talking about that it was brought at night? Umukim laba paikin. We're talking about something that was put on taka during the day likarav by day, and then as we had a number of times, instead of paikin, that's something that was the fire gets makes things lively and it causes it to pop out off the mizbeach, that you could bring it back on. So we're saying as long as it was brought during the day, you could put it back on at night. Rav Dimi says b'shem Rav Yanai, it's also talking about this case. It's talking about me, Amar Rav Yanai. Hachi, could Rav Yanai really be the man who says talking about paikin? Amar Rav Yanai. Ketara shepaka me'al gav mizbeach afil karton sheba ein machzir noisan one of the things we had mentioned here, we mentioned a number of things. One of the things we mentioned was Ketairis. And he says that Ketairis cannot be brought back on if they're Poikin. So how can we say it's Rabbi Yanai? I'm sorry, I skipped. So this is the explanation, because we say only Ichulei Ayla go back when they're Poikin, but not Ketairis. So how could you say it's talking about Poikin? Sami Mikan Ketairis. The Gemara says you have to amend it and say that Ketairis was not correctly included in the list according to Rabbi Yanai's Pshat. Amar Ravasi ki pashat Rabbi Elazar b'Menachos, when Rabbi Elazar was learning Menachos, boy hachi, he asked the following question: Kaimitz shesidru v'sidru lo v'samaracha, a kaimitz that you put on the mizbeach and then you put on top of it the wood. Normally, when you burn something on wood, you make a fire and then you put the object on top of it. If you did the other way around, you first put down the kaimitz and then you put the merach on top of it. Mao derech haktar b'kach, ayin derech haktar b'kach. Is that considered haktar or not? Teku. We left it in a question. A similar question. Now he says that definitely is the haktara of Evarim. Evarim, it seems, are burnt differently than kaimet, so he doesn't really have a question about whether that's their haktar b'kach, but he has a different question, that maybe it's excluded from a pasuk if you did it in this unusual order. Ala eitzim amar Rachmana davka ala eitzim. Since it says ala eitzim in the pasuk when it describes the Evarim, so it has to be on the eitzim. Since there's another pasuk that says that which is eaten by the eish and the oil on the mizbeach, it says that it's on the mizbeach. So that means it could even be underneath the maracha. Maybe you could do it whichever way you want. Take. He leaves that as a take. What happened if you set up the Evarim, the different limbs that are being burnt on this mizbeach? You put it next to the pile of wood. There's the question about whether the levina, the bezichin of the levina, they have to go directly on the lechem upon him, or they're next to the lechem upon him, and it depends. It turns on the question of what the word al means. Does al mean that it has to be physically on top, or can it even mean right next to it, adjacent? That al means it has to be on top. The al ha'etzim ksiv, it says al ha'etzim, so therefore it has to be on the wood. According to Mandamar, that al could even be next to it. What is going to be then over here if you put the Evarim next to the Maracha? Hachanami al b'samach. Do we say over here also that al allows you to put it next to it? Oidilma al eitzim dumi al mizbeach. Since it says you have to do it al eitzim, and also says al mizbeach. Mahasam al mamish. Just like when it says al mizbeach, it certainly doesn't mean you could put it next to the mizbeach. No one would consider such a thing. You could be makdir on the floor next to the mizbeach. Avachanami al mamish. Maybe you'd say over here al should be mamish. Take, we leave it as a question. Okay, we'll stop over here. Yeshakayach, thank you all for coming.